Vinny is supposed to be 6'4", possibly an ex-boxer, and a guy who is smarter than he realized. He's not sure he is smart, largely because he's dyslexic. That's what I wanted for Vinny.
It was supposed to be a cheap, disposable studio comedy. Instead, a movie about a fast-talking Brooklyn lawyer in a loud leather jacket and his car genius fiancée became a cinematic legend. But behind the scenes of My Cousin Vinny lies a wild web of real-life prison danger, meticulous legal brilliance, and an Oscar win that birthed Hollywood's ultimate conspiracy theory. Think you know Vinny Gambini? Think again, because the real story is far crazier than anything said in court. Here are 15 facts you did not know about the hilarious show. The real-life lawyer who inspired Vinny Gambini. Before Vinny Gambini ever paced a Southern courtroom in a squeaky leather jacket, he existed in the wild, real-world experiences of screenwriter Dale Launer. In the late 80s, Launer was traveling through the Deep South when he began contemplating a classic fish-out-of-water scenario. What happens when a fast-talking, street-smart urbanite is forced to defend himself in a slow-paced, conservative rural community? But to make the legal defense work, Launer needed a very specific kind of lawyer. Someone who lacked formal prestige, but possessed a relentless, scrap-to-the-finish survival instinct. The spark of inspiration finally hit when Launer met a real-life attorney who had taken an incredibly rocky path to pass the bar. This lawyer was far from an Ivy League academic. He was a guy who had flunked the bar exam multiple times, struggled to find his footing, but possessed an undeniable, magnetic charisma and a deep understanding of human nature. He relied on pure, unfiltered street smarts and a sharp reading of people rather than stuffy legal precedents. Launer realized that a character who took 13 years and 6 tries to finally pass the bar would have an incredible, desperate edge. This real-life underdog's struggle became the DNA of Vinny Gambini. It gave Vinny his signature chip on his shoulder, his defensive posturing, and that brilliant, unorthodox style of cross-examination that relied on catching witnesses in practical lies rather than blinding them with high society legal jargon. But how did a guy who barely passed the bar end up wearing a bright red tuxedo? The screamingly accurate law school pedigree. While most Hollywood courtroom dramas sacrifice legal reality for the sake of theatrical, mic-dropping monologues, My Cousin Vinny is famously revered by the legal community as a masterclass in actual trial advocacy. It is not just highly regarded. Law professors across the country regularly use clips of Vinny's cross-examinations as primary teaching tools for future attorneys. The secret behind this flawless legal precision lies with director Jonathan Lynn. Unlike most directors who rely on Hollywood consultants, Lynn actually graduated with a law degree from Cambridge University. He was deeply irritated by standard cinematic courtroom tropes and was absolutely determined to make sure every single procedure, objection, and piece of evidence followed strict, real-world protocol. From the nerve-wracking, step-by-step reality of the arraignment to the rules of discovery, the film is practically a textbook. The prosecution doesn't hide evidence in a dramatic reveal. They hand over the entire case file because the law requires them to do so. When Vinny cross-examines the prosecution's eyewitnesses, he demonstrates textbook techniques of impeachment. He doesn't badger them. He slowly, methodically traps them in their own physical limitations. He uses a tape measure to prove an elderly woman's eyesight is failing, and calculates the exact cooking time of grits to shatter another witness's timeline. Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia even praised the movie from the bench, and federal judges frequently cite it. It proves that the most entertaining comedy is often the one rooted in absolute, unyielding truth. Joe Pesci's literal Grateful Dead wardrobe source. Few visual gags in cinema history land with the immediate, hilarious punch of Vinny Gambini walking into a conservative Southern courtroom wearing a loud, bright red tuxedo, complete with a ruffled shirt and a giant, floppy black bow tie. In a movie built entirely around a clash of cultures, Vinny's wildly inappropriate wardrobe tells the audience absolutely everything they need to know about his outsider status before he even opens his mouth. But while the script explains that Vinny had to desperately purchase the ridiculous second-hand getup because his one decent suit got covered in thick mud, the real-world origin of the costume is even more bizarre. To bring Vinny's garish, highly specific style to life, costume designer Carol Wood bypassed high-end Hollywood costume rental shops and elite tailors. Instead, she hit the road, scouring real-world thrift stores, estate sales, and vintage second-hand shops across the Deep South. The goal was to find clothes that felt genuinely discarded, authentic, and spectacularly out of date. The infamous crimson-colored tuxedo that Vinny reluctantly wears to court was actually a genuine relic of the 70s, discovered gathering dust in a low-end second-hand shop. When Joe Pesci first tried on the vintage formal wear, the fit was so hilariously awkward and tight that the crew immediately knew they had struck gold. Pesci leaned into the physical comedy of the tight, restrictive suit, adjusting his posture and stiffening his movements to emphasize how utterly uncomfortable Vinny felt in his own skin. This thrift store treasure hunt didn't just save the production money, it gave the film a gritty, tactile, and brilliantly authentic visual identity that a studio-constructed wardrobe never could have replicated. Marisa Tomei was not the first choice for Mona Lisa Vito. It is impossible to imagine My Cousin Vinny without the explosive, fast-talking brilliance of Marisa Tomei as Mona Lisa Vito. Clad in floral spandex, tapping her foot with impatient attitude, and delivering highly specialized automotive testimony, Tomei crafted one of the most memorable comedic characters in film history. Yet, she was incredibly close to never getting the part. Before Tomei's historic casting, the studio was desperately searching for a bankable, established Hollywood star to fill Mona Lisa's high heels. The role of Vinny's street-smart, Brooklyn-born fiancée was initially offered to a slate of A-list actresses who were commanding major box office draws in the early 90s. Heavy hitters like Gina Davis, Carrie Fisher, and even dynamic powerhouses like Cyndi Lauper were considered for the part. Many of these established stars turned the role down, seeing the character as a superficial, one-note Italian girlfriend caricature on the written page. It took the visionary foresight of director Jonathan Lynn to realize that Mona Lisa needed to be played by an actor with genuine, authentic outer borough grit. When Tomei, who was largely a relative newcomer at the time, walked into her audition, she brought a sharp, highly specific New York rhythm that completely electrified the room. Rather than playing Mona Lisa as a ditzy sidekick, Tomei infused her with high intellect, fierce independence, and a colorful, zero-nonsense attitude. The studio took a massive gamble on her, and the payoff was historic. The infamous Oscar conspiracy theory that won't die. When Marisa Tomei's name was called for Best Supporting Actress at the 65th Academy Awards in 1993, the entire entertainment world gasped. She had just beaten out a formidable lineup of classically trained, dramatic British and Australian royalty. It was a monumental shock that a light, broad comedy performance had taken home the gold. Almost immediately, a toxic, highly persistent urban legend was born. The claim that Tomei's win was a total mistake. The conspiracy theory, heavily pushed by cynical film critics like Rex Reed, claimed that 73-year-old presenter Jack Palance was heavily intoxicated and read the wrong name off the teleprompter or became too confused to read the actual card. According to the rumor, the Academy was too embarrassed to correct the error live on television, allowing the mistake to stand. This rumor is 100% false. The Academy's strict protocol has always dictated that representatives from the accounting firm Price Waterhouse, now PwC, stand in the wings. If a presenter ever read the incorrect name, the accountants were legally bound to walk onto the stage immediately and halt the broadcast to correct it. Decades later, when the infamous La La Land and Moonlight mix-up actually did occur, the public saw exactly how fast those protocols go into action. Tomei's historic win was completely legitimate, earned through pure scene-stealing comedic genius. Tomei's performance was sheer perfection, but her automotive expertise was actually born in a cloud of real-world grease. The posittraction truth. The car science is purely legit. The climax of My Cousin Vinny hinges entirely on a highly complex, lightning-fast breakdown of automotive physics. When Mona Lisa Vito takes the stand, she effortlessly dismantles the prosecution's entire case by explaining how Michelin XGV tires on a 1964 Buick Skylark could not have made the two equal-length tire marks left at the crime scene. In a movie landscape where writers constantly make up fake science to force a happy ending, screenwriter Dale Launer refused to take the easy way out. He spent weeks deeply embedded in automotive manuals, consulting real mechanics, and interviewing engineers at General Motors to make sure the technical details were completely bulletproof. As Lisa explains with fierce attitude, the car that made those tracks absolutely had to possess two very specific mechanical traits: posittraction, a limited slip differential, and an independent rear suspension. The 1964 Skylark featured a solid rear axle and a regular differential. If one tire went up on the curb, a solid axle would force the opposite tire to tilt, leaving a light, uneven mark. Furthermore, without posittraction, only one tire would spin uselessly in the Alabama mud while the other did nothing. This meant the getaway vehicle had to be General Motors' only other car with those exact dimensions and features. The 1963 Pontiac Tempest. Launer's obsessive dedication paid off. Decades after the film's release, professional mechanics and engineering professors still marvel at the scene, calling it the most technically accurate description of automotive suspension and drivetrain physics ever committed to celluloid. Fred Gwynn's heartbreaking final screen performance. To a generation of television fans, Fred Gwynne was beloved as the gentle, towering, green-skinned patriarch Herman Munster. But to moviegoers of the 90s, he gave one of the most brilliant comedic performances of his life as the stern, uncompromising Judge Chamberlain Haller. Standing at a massive 6'5", Gwynne's deep, booming baritone and deadpan delivery served as the ultimate, immovable obstacle to Vinny Gambini's chaotic, informal lawyering. Yet, behind Gwynne's flawless performance lay a deeply bittersweet reality. This would be the final film role of his long, legendary career. During filming, Gwynne was already quietly battling pancreatic cancer, a diagnosis he kept largely to himself while on set. Despite his failing health, he brought an immense, towering energy to the role, but the shoot was not without its real-world friction. Gwynne, a classically trained actor who took his craft incredibly seriously, initially clashed with director Jonathan Lynn over the pacing of the courtroom scenes. Lynn wanted the comedy to move at a relentless, snappy pace, while Gwynne preferred to let his reactions simmer in long, excruciating silences to maximize the tension between Haller and Vinny. Lynn eventually relented, realizing that Gwynne's slow, icy stares were comedic gold. The actor passed away just over a year after the movie's release, in July 1993, at the age of 66. His performance as the rigid Southern judge remains a towering, unforgettable monument to his incredible range, proving he was so much more than just the monster that made him famous. The studio hated the title and tried to change it. Before My Cousin Vinny became a household name and a certified pop culture catchphrase, the executives at 20th Century Fox were absolutely terrified of the film's title. During development and early production, studio heads strongly believed that My Cousin Vinny was a weak, deeply misleading, and potentially damaging title for a mainstream comedy. Their primary concern was that the name sounded way too much like a cheap, low-budget mob movie or a dramatic gangster flick. Given Joe Pesci's recent Oscar-winning turn, as the psychopathic mobster Tommy DeVito in Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, 1990. Foxy fight executives worried that audiences would walk into the theater expecting a violent Italian-American mafia drama, only to be utterly confused by a light-hearted Southern courtroom comedy. The studio aggressively pushed screenwriter Dale Launer and the producers to change the title to something more generic, clean, and broadly appealing. They pitched countless alternative titles that focused strictly on the legal and courtroom aspects of the story. However, the creative team dug in their heels. They argued that the title was perfect because it immediately established the central premise: a desperate family calling in the only lawyer they could possibly afford, who just so happened to be a highly unqualified, loud-mouthed relative from Brooklyn. Even co-star Ralph Macchio later recalled producer Jerry Weintraub defending it, famously stating that while it was technically a terrible title, that was precisely what made it such a memorable, great title. The creatives won the battle, the title stayed, and it went on to define the film's enduring, scrappy legacy. If the studio got their way, we might have had a completely different movie and a completely different cast. Joe Pesci based Vinny's voice on a Brooklyn barber. To make Vinny Gambini work as a character, Joe Pesci had to find a voice that was highly specific. If Vinny sounded too much like a dangerous, cold-blooded gangster, the comedy would instantly evaporate, and the audience would lose their empathy for him. But if he sounded too soft or intellectual, his fish-out-of-water struggle in a traditional Southern courtroom wouldn't land with the necessary punch. Pesci needed to construct a vocal identity that was aggressively loud, defensive, and unpolished, yet deeply endearing, warm, and fiercely protective of his young cousin. The exact inspiration for Vinny's thick, unmistakable accent and rapid-fire dialect came from Pesci's own childhood growing up in the working-class neighborhoods of New Jersey and New York. Pesci specifically modeled Vinny's speech patterns, hand gestures, and defensive posturing after a real-life barber he knew from his old neighborhood. This barber was a guy who was incredibly smart and sharp, but because he lacked a formal, high-society education, he constantly overcompensated by talking over people, using aggressive slang, and treating every casual conversation like a high-stakes argument. Pesci took this hyper-defensive, highly rhythmic outer borough energy and channeled it directly into Vinny's legal persona. This allowed Pesci to deliver courtroom objections with the fast-talking, rapid-fire cadence of a street-corner debate, creating a brilliant contrast with the slow, drawn-out Southern drawl of the local prosecutor, Jim Trotter III. It was a vocal masterclass that transformed Vinny from a simple stereotype into a deeply authentic, living human being. The grim Alabama prison was a real, active penitentiary. To capture the bleak, suffocating dread of two innocent college kids facing the electric chair, director Jonathan Lynn refused to build a sterile Hollywood soundstage. Instead, the production crew packed up and headed to Alto, Georgia, to shoot the prison sequences inside the very real, highly active Lee Arrendale State Prison. The cold concrete walls, rusted iron bars, and heavy steel doors seen on screen were not props. They were the daily reality for hundreds of inmates. Filming in an active, maximum security facility brought an undeniable, hair-raising tension to the set. When Bill and Stan are shown walking through the daunting, noisy cell blocks, the background noise wasn't added in post-production. The chaotic clanging of metal cups, the echoing shouts, and the dark, intimidating atmosphere were entirely genuine. To make the environment feel even more authentic, the production actually cast real-life inmates to serve as extras in the background. The sheer contrast between Ralph Macchio's terrified, wide-eyed performance and the raw, unvarnished reality of the prison environment did most of the acting work for him. It injected a heavy dose of stakes into what was otherwise a light-hearted comedy, reminding the audience that if Vinny messed up this trial, his young cousin and his friend would face a genuinely horrifying fate. The secret behind the Utes scene, improvisation. The The single most iconic comedic exchange in My Cousin Vinny occurs when Vinny casually refers to the two defendants as the two Utes, prompting a deeply bewildered Judge Haller to interrupt and demand, "What is a Ute?" While the script is incredibly tight, this legendary piece of dialogue was actually born from a real-life, behind-the-scenes communication barrier during pre-production. The director of the film, Jonathan Lynn, is a posh, highly articulate Englishman who was educated at Cambridge. During rehearsals, Joe Pesci, who possessed a thick, aggressive, rapid-fire North Jersey accent, was discussing the script with Lynn. Pesci kept referring to the two main characters as the two Utes. Lynn, utterly baffled by the slang, stopped the actor and politely asked, "I'm sorry, Joe. What did you say? What is a Ute?" Pesci burst out laughing, explaining that he was trying to say youths. Lynn found the linguistic barrier and the sheer clash of regional accents so incredibly funny that he ordered the screenwriter to immediately write the exact exchange directly into the courtroom script. What started as a simple, real-life misunderstanding between a British director and a street-smart Jersey actor became the most quoted, timeless joke of the entire movie. The soundtrack, Hidden Gem, Joe Pesci's musical spin-off album. The cultural footprint of My Cousin Vinny was so massive that it eventually spilled off the movie screen and directly into the music recording studio. While the film's official soundtrack features a classic, blues-infused southern rock score, the true hidden gem masterpiece of the Vinny phenomenon is a highly bizarre, surreal musical spin-off album released by Joe Pesci himself. Believe it or not, in 1998, 6 years after the film took the box office by storm, Pesci stepped back into the recording booth to release a full-length studio album titled Vincent LaGuardia Gambini Sings Just For You. This was not a standard celebrity vanity project where an actor attempts to sing serious love ballads. Instead, Pesci performed the entire album completely in character as Vinny Gambini, delivering songs with the exact same thick, rapid-fire Brooklyn accent and defensive, street-smart attitude that made the character famous. The album is a wild, genre-bending trip that features everything from jazzy lounge standards and big band swing to a genuinely shocking, highly explicit parody hip-hop track titled Yo Cousin Vinny. On this track, Pesci actually raps, throwing out fast-talking New York slang, heavy profanity, and hilarious legal references over a driving, late 90s hip-hop beat. Far from a total joke, the album featured top-tier studio musicians and actually showcased Pesci's genuine, real-world musical talents. He had actually worked as a professional lounge singer in the 60s before his acting career ever took off. It remains one of the single most delightfully weird, highly entertaining, and deeply forgotten relics of 90s movie marketing. But what happened to the town of Wazoo after the cameras stopped rolling? Sacrificing sleep, the brutal 21-day shoot schedule. While My Cousin Vinny feels incredibly breezy, relaxed, and effortlessly paced on screen, the physical reality of making the movie was an absolute sleep-deprived gauntlet for the entire cast and crew. Because 20th Century Fox viewed the project as a highly risky, low-budget, mid-tier comedy, they refused to grant the production a standard, comfortable multi-month shooting schedule. Instead, director Jonathan Lynn was handed an incredibly tight, razor-thin budget and forced to cram the entire principal photography of the movie into a brutal, breakneck schedule of just a few short weeks. To pull off this cinematic miracle, the production had to move at a relentless, hyper-efficient pace. The cast and crew routinely worked grueling 18-hour days, shifting rapidly between different locations across rural Georgia with almost zero downtime. Because of the intense time constraints, there was absolutely no room for error or indulgent, time-consuming creative experimentation on set. If a scene wasn't captured perfectly in just a few takes, the crew had to adapt, pack up, and immediately move on to the next setup. Joe Pesci, Marissa Tomei, and Fred Gwynne were constantly operating on sheer adrenaline and severe sleep deprivation, memorizing massive blocks of rapid-fire courtroom dialogue in their trailers in the dead of night. Tomei later recalled that the exhausting, high-pressure environment actually worked to her advantage. The sheer physical fatigue of the shoot naturally fueled Mona Lisa Vito's legendary, highly impatient, and zero-nonsense attitude on the witness stand. The intense pressure cooker environment forced the actors to rely entirely on their raw, instinctual comedic timing, turning what could have been a rushed disaster into a highly polished, lightning-fast masterpiece. The deleted scenes and the sequel we never got. When a low-budget, mid-tier comedy defies every box office expectation and morphs into a towering pop culture phenomenon, Hollywood's immediate knee-jerk reaction is always the same: make a sequel. In the years following the film's wild success, 20th Century Fox desperately wanted to capitalize on the public's obsession with Vinny Gambini and Mona Lisa Vito. Screenwriter Dale Launer was approached to craft a follow-up story, and he came up with a highly intriguing, incredibly funny premise that would have taken the Brooklyn duo global. Under Launer's proposed script, Vinny's sudden fame from his Alabama victory leads to him taking on a major corporate case in the United Kingdom. The sequel would have thrust Vinny directly into the stuffy, ultra-formal world of the British legal system. Rather than navigating the small-town quirks of rural Alabama, Vinny would have been forced to wear a traditional powdered wig, address British magistrates as "my lord," and master highly restrictive centuries-old English courtroom protocols. The comedic potential of Joe Pesci raging against British polite society, while Marissa Tomei's Brooklyn attitude clashed with London's elite, was absolute gold. Mona Lisa would operate as Vinny's unlicensed investigator, turning them into a modern-day, highly dysfunctional Nick and Nora Charles. However, the cinematic sequel died in development hell. Joe Pesci, notoriously selective about his roles, was highly reluctant to return to the character, preferring to step away from the Hollywood limelight. Despite the film's sequel never seeing the light of day, the universe of Vinny didn't completely disappear. Decades later, original screenwriter Dale Launer authorized a series of official, written sequel novels penned by author Lawrence Kelter. The books, beginning with Back to Brooklyn, successfully transport Vinny and Lisa back to their home turf, where Vinny is forced to take on massive New York crime trials to keep their heads above water. Yet, for film lovers, the original remains a beautifully self-contained, lightning-in-a-bottle moment. In the end, we didn't need a sequel to cement this masterpiece in pop culture history. The grit, the grits, and the magic of instant breakfast. At the absolute center of My Cousin Vinny's timeless charm is its brilliant, multi-layered clash of cultures. The film doesn't just pit a street-smart New Yorker against a traditional Southern community. It masterfully uses small, mundane details of daily life to represent the massive gulf between these two worlds. There is no better symbol for this than the legendary, highly iconic grits scene. When Vinny and Mona Lisa sit down in a local diner for the very first time, Vinny is completely baffled by the menu, famously squinting at his plate and asking the deadpan cook, "What is a grit, anyways?" This hilarious culinary confusion is not just a cheap, throwaway gag about regional food differences. Throughout the movie, grits serve as a highly calculated, symbolic building block for the entire legal defense. When Vinny cross-examines the prosecution's star eyewitness, Mr. Tipton, the entire testimony hinges on the man's timeline of breakfast preparation. Tipton swears he saw the defendants flee the scene during the exact 5-minute window it took him to cook his breakfast. But Vinny, having immersed himself in the local culture, delivers a flawless, devastating trap. Are you sure they were instant grits? Because no self-respecting Southerner uses instant grits. With relentless, rapid-fire logic, Vinny points out that it takes a full 20 minutes for the entire grit-eating world to cook real grits. by asking if the laws of physics somehow cease to operate in Tipton's kitchen to produce magic grits. Vinny completely dismantles the witness's credibility and shatters the prosecution's timeline. The scene perfectly encapsulates why the film is so beloved. Vinny doesn't win the trial by being a pretentious Ivy League academic who looks down on the locals. He wins by listening, adapting, and using the South's very own customs, culture, and culinary physics to uncover the absolute truth. It is a brilliant, satisfying moment where food, law, and human nature collide, proving that a little respect for grits can save a life. And so, it lasts. Over 30 years after its 1992 release, My Cousin Vinny stands as an incredibly rare double threat in Hollywood history, a certified box office home run that somehow became a sacred text for the American legal profession. Produced on a shoestring budget of just $11 million, the studio initially treated the production as a risky gamble. Yet, it defied all expectations to gross over $64 million worldwide, proving that audiences were absolutely starved for a smart, rhythmically perfect, character-driven comedy that refused to treat its viewers or its rural Southern setting like a cheap punchline. But the film's true legacy stretches far beyond the box office, and Marissa Tomei's historic, show-stopping Oscar victory. The real magic of the movie is how it has steadily aged into an elite, untouched piece of cinematic real estate. Ask any elite trial lawyer, federal judge, or Ivy League law professor what the most realistically accurate courtroom movie of all time is, and they won't point you to the heavy-handed drama of To Kill a Mockingbird or the theatrics of A Few Good Men. They will point you directly to Vinny Gambini. In fact, the American Bar Association formally ranked it as the third greatest legal film ever made, and law schools across the globe still screen its brilliant cross-examination scenes to teach future litigators how to methodically trap a witness. Furthermore, the movie broke the rules of traditional Hollywood storytelling by completely abandoning the lazy, corrupt Southern system trope. There are no cartoonish, mustache-twirling villains in the town of Wazoo. Judge Haller is simply a rigid stickler for professional decorum, and Prosecutor Jim Trotter III is a fair-minded professional who genuinely believes he has the right suspects, even going so far as to hand over his entire case file and warmly congratulate Vinny when the truth finally comes to light. It is a beautifully balanced, incredibly satisfying dynamic that keeps the dramatic focus entirely on the intellectual puzzle of the trial. Combine that structural genius with an endless, decade-spanning barrage of timeless, quotable lines about Utes, magic grits, and stamping biological clocks, and you have a flawless, lightning-in-a-bottle masterpiece that will simply never go out of style. And that is the final verdict. From magic grits to historic Oscars, Vinny and Lisa's courthouse hustle remains the ultimate comedic masterpiece. Now keep those tire tracks perfectly even. If you want to keep receiving awesome updates, exclusive behind-the-scenes deep dives, and engaging pop culture breakdowns like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button.